Welcome back to another classified and extremely confidential U-File.
Today we travel to a land old in civilization and culture,
along with myth and tales, as we investigate a dangerous
omen of death.
Top of the morning to you lads. Welcome to the Emerald Isles, otherwise known as Ireland, or specifically Southern Ireland, as these two do not like getting mixed together. There's a ton of history going on there, a lot of history. That, as I'm feeling awfully worried about this random car here. Oh shit! Anyway, Ireland itself is known for its culture and beauty. These are almost fantastical like hills and fields that stretch on for miles and miles. Or witness the cliffs of Moher, and even more places of beauty such as Ibarra Peninsula and Killarney. If you're a total hippie of course, as this will be boring to many. You can sniff your own farts in private if you want on those fields, that's up to you. Most will love to visit the historic towns such as Cork and Dublin. Sit down with the charming locals if they aren't drunk and haven't started fighting already. Have a nice pint of their most favourite beverage, Guinness, while watching a game of rugby. Or if you're like me, head to the Irish Rock and Roll Museum experience, brother! But we aren't here for any old tourism. Ireland also has a culture steeped in centuries old myths. Ones that are harmless, like leprechauns, if you don't steal their gold that is.
I want to go!
And ones that like to play tricks, such as the Fae and Changelings, to some that are far worse and you should never tread near, such as Banshees. Easy there, girl. Hookahs, slows and marrows, which many have lost their lives to. The one most important of all is why we're here. An omen of death running on all fours, galloping in the darkness of night. One of the darkest tales ever to emigrate from the land of Ireland is the Dullahan, a headless ghostly rider known to be the embodiment of the Celtic god Crum Deeb, races through the Irish plains, towns and villages in the darkness of night and will never stop until he finds his victim and states their name. You! And this person's soul is called to death, and they cannot do anything to stop their impending fate. Well, at least we know why Joe Biden acts like this now. The Dullahan is one of the most popular Celtic myths and myths in general from around the world. Many people recognise the character, but most importantly, they know it as another name in a certain literature from the States, along with the Dullahan being popularised in other forms of media and entertainment. So you want to see how this bad, headless boy looks like? Well, it differs in appearance, but it most notably wears a long fancy black cloak with high collars that cover that headless whiz they have going on up there, while wearing a fine gentleman-like suit underneath. It can sometimes wear riding gloves, depends on the weather at the time, you know, and wears heavy tucked-in trousers into leather boots fit for riding long distances. He may be looking for his next victim, but he gotta look stylish doing it. Dullahans may be headless, but they always ride with their severed heads with them, either in their arms or by the waist, which will definitely have a difficult time not being swung about when riding. Poor head. But the head overall will contain the most frightening appearance. Covered in rotting flesh with an odour of cheese?
Cheese!
With a strange complexion similar to dough. Worse yet, his mouth is permanently split into a creepy smile, while his eyes are lit with a fiery darkness. I constantly look for his next victim, with deafening laughter.
Terrifying.
For the horse they ride upon, it's always depicted as a black horse that is dark as the shadows it rides from, and rides so fast and ferociously that the Dullahan steed emanates fire from his nostrils and hooves, from riding a rapid pace constantly. Other depictions see him with a number of horses riding a carriage, which would be even more of a fright to see as it's made from coffins, tombstones and bones, showing his intent to take souls with him to the afterlife. But you know they're the Dullahan's goodest boys though, they deserve all the carrots, yes they do. Nothing can ever stop a Dullahan, no gate, door or person. Definitely as a person you go blind upon seeing them, which is why many in villages and towns close their curtains, mainly out of fear upon seeing the headless rider. Another reason they go blind is what the Dullahan wields, one which is a whip made out of a literal human spine which he uses to whip the eyes out of unsuspecting onlookers, and another is a basin of blood which he also holds and uses to throw blood in people's eyes. That's the biggest troll move to ever to exist. So imagine upon seeing a ghastly headless rider with a head screaming your name. It's also holding a human spine and a basin of blood. It's not gonna lie, it's metal as fuck. The only thing that can keep a Dullahan at bay is precious metal. It has to be thrown on the ground before him. With that, he will flee into the dark night. But this will never ultimately defeat him. Families were known to keep a ton of gold on them if they were ever to encounter the Dullahan. There is many stories and tales speaking of those encountering the Dullahan, but this horror tale is probably the most famous of them all. One of the most famous tales that involves the Dullahan is ironically where it's not called the Dullahan at all, and is known as the Headless Horseman. One of the most recognisable horror literature characters alongside Dracula, Frankenstein and the Jews. That comes from the story of Sleepy Hollow and Ichabod Crane's adventures in the dark and dreary rural village in upstate New York, written by Washington Irving in 1820. The legend goes as this.
From the listless repose of the place and the peculiar character of its inhabitants, who are descendants from the original Dutch settlers, this sequestered glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare oftener across the valley than in any other part of the country, and the nightmare, with her whole ninefold, seems to make it the favorite scene of her gambols. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air is the apparition of a figure on horseback, without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of night, as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of those parts, who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning this spectre, allege that the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to the scene of the battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow like a midnight blast is owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows, and the spectre is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long sniped nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart towards the sex, and it is not to be wondered at that so tempting a morsel soon found favor in his eyes, more especially after he had visited her in her paternal mansion. Old Baltus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm, but within those everything was snug, happy, and well-conditioned. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon the hearty abundance, rather than the style in which he lived. Summoning up therefore a show of courage, he demanded in stammering accents, "Who are you?" He received no reply. He repeated his demand in a still more agitated voice. Still there was no answer. Once more he cudgeled the sides of the inflexible gunpowder, and shutting his eyes, broke forth with involuntary fervor into a psalm tune. Just then the shadowy object of alarm put itself in motion, and with a scramble and a bound stood at once in the middle of the road. Though the night was dark and dismal, yet the form of the unknown might now in some degree be ascertained. He appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions, and mounted on a black horse of powerful frame. He made no offer of molestation or sociability, but kept aloof on one side of the road, jogging along in the blind side of old Gunpowder, who had now got over his fright and waywardness. Ichabod, who had no relish for this strange midnight companion, and bethought himself of the adventure of Brom Bones with the galloping Hessian, now quickened his steed in hopes of leaving him behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink within him. He endeavored to resume his psalm tune, but his parched tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a stave. There was something in the moody and dogged silence of this pertinacious companion that was mysterious and appalling. It was soon fearfully accounted for. On mounting a rising ground, which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip, but the spectre started full jump with him. Away, then, they dashed through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lank body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. They had now reached the road which turns off to Sleepy Hollow, but Gunpowder, who seemed possessed with a demon, instead of keeping up it, made an opposite turn and plunged headlong downhill to the left. This road leads through a sandy hollow shaded by trees for about a quarter of a mile, where it crosses the bridge famous in goblin story, and just beyond swells the green knoll on which stands the whitewashed church. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side, and now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish, according to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash. He was tumbled headlong into the dust, and gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind.
The Headless Horseman and the story of Sleepy Hollow are entirely ingrained in pop culture, just like from the book in general, but with 2 movies. The first from a company called Disney, maybe you heard of them, but their version of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, which I'm sure scared many kids back in the day.
I'm just kidding. Stop crying, Taffeta.
Another is probably one of my favourite movies of all time, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, which is loosely based on the novel, and the myth of the Dullahan here is quite different. It was summoned by a very horny witch for one. This is also probably why the Headless Horseman and the Dullahan in general is a noticeable character, as the movie is a masterclass in gothic horror. Like, listen to this theme. Ooh, how it makes the dick tingle. And Christina Ricci is gorgeous as ever at it too. Relax, she was 18 at the time when the movie came out. If I was talking about Casper, then you would be definitely asking questions. But it isn't just these 2 properties that the Headless Horseman, but the Dullahan in general, has appeared in. The character is more famous than you realise. It isn't just movies like Sleepy Hollow that the Dullahan has appeared in. Well, there was that TV show.
I hope you're right about this manuscript. 12 hours until the horsemen ride again.
Lieutenant, I've done something catastrophic.
Yeah, the Horseman wasn't even the main focus after the first season. Other than that, the Dullahan has made appearances in a number of TV shows and video games, especially with Dragon's Dogma 2 this year. Damn, need to get back into that game. Appearances including films and TV such as Darby O'Gill and the Little People with his carriage variation, Scooby-Doo, which is probably one of my favourite episodes of all time, Shrek, where it oddly speaks without a head,
I've always wanted to play the flute.
and a host of others. But oddly enough, there's a country where they have the Dullahans a lot, and it's Japan with anime. Yeah, out of all the appearances by the Dullahan, anime has the most, and it's usually an anime chick. Can't say I'm surprised, but hey, I ain't complaining. This is Japan we are talking about, and they are obsessed with other cultures' myths. And Jack the Ripper for some reason.
You, serial killer Jack the Ripper. Your murdering days are done. Your soul is mine!
So, Bessie, now I'll make you even better looking than you are. I'll tear you up from the inside, and trust me, I'll make you like it. You'll be as lovely as scattered rose petals. What in the blue hell? That crazy blight is inside our horse!
Yeah, he's appeared quite a bit too. For characters, there's Salty from Dora Dora, Yui Alpha from Overlord, Verdia from Konosuba whose curse didn't really work like how he expected to do.
間に合わんよ。汝に死の宣告を。お前は1週間後に死ぬだろう。
A few moments later.
なんてことだ。つまり貴様はこの私に死の呪いをかけ、呪いを解いてほしくば俺の言うことを聞けと。つまりはそういうことなのか。
ダークネスが何を言ってるのか理解したくない。
呪いぐらいではこの私は屈しはしない。屈しはしないが。どうしようカズマ。他に燃えるシチュエーションだ。行きたくはない。行きたくはないが仕方がない。ギリギリまで抵抗してみるから邪魔はしないでくれ。では行ってくる。
Fail. Pathetic.
Lala from Monster Musume, Toshino from There's Something About Dullahan chat, which is currently still a manga, but is added to my read list, and from interviews with Monster Girls, Koyuku Machi, who is probably the cutest of them all.
Into control. Look! See? Ooh. Ah.
Oh, wow,
amazing!
cool.
Just cute though, this is an anime of high school Monster Girls. Save it for the succubus teacher, but it's definitely a wholesome anime overall though.
Hey, Marty. My teeth are super itchy.
Will you turn the page, please?
The one that's hot and waifu material is Lala from Monster Musume, for reasons. So yeah, it's cool but strange that Japan is infatuated with the myth of the Dullahan and the character in general is fully ingrained in culture and our hearts. So we say goodbye to the lands of Ireland, but we'll be back as there's a ton of myths, like those banshees. Music to my ears. But be careful when treading the long dark roads of Ireland as you don't know what you are going to encounter in the dark. See you next time on the U-Files.